What if I told you that somewhere in the United States there exists an abandoned hospital where, even today, the operating room doors open by themselves every night at exactly 3:07 a.m., where surgical lights flicker on despite the building having no electricity, and where a doctor officially declared dead decades ago is still believed to be performing surgeries on patients who were never supposed to exist in the first place? This is a chilling legend of St. Ravenwood Hospital, located deep in the outskirts of Massachusetts, hidden behind overgrown trees, rusted iron gates, and warning signs that no one seems to remember putting up. The hospital was built in the early 1950s, during a time when America was overwhelmed with wounded soldiers returning from war and a growing number of patients suffering from severe psychological trauma, and it was praised as a revolutionary medical facility designed to handle cases other hospitals refused to treat. On paper, St. Ravenwood was a place of healing, progress, and hope, equipped with advanced surgical rooms and staffed by some of the most talented medical professionals in the country. But from the very beginning, those who worked there claimed the atmosphere felt wrong, as if the building itself was watching them. Nurses reported cold spots in hallways where no windows existed. Patients complained of hearing footsteps stopping outside their rooms late at night, and security guards often avoided patrolling the East Wing after midnight, claiming they felt an overwhelming sense of dread for no logical reason. At the center of all these unsettled reports was the hospital's chief surgeon, Dr. Jonathan Crowe, a man admired publicly for his brilliance, but feared privately for his disturbing behavior. Dr. Crowe was known for performing complex surgeries that other doctors considered impossible, and his success rate earned the hospital massive federal funding. Yet rumors began to circulate among staff that his methods crossed ethical boundaries. Nurses whispered that he often scheduled surgeries during late-night hours, insisting on working alone, locking the operating theater doors from the inside, and refusing assistance even during high-risk procedures. Medical logs showed inconsistencies. Anesthesia records appeared altered, and some patients listed as transferred or deceased had no corresponding discharge reports or death certificates, raising quiet concerns that were quickly buried by hospital administration. Families who tried to question these disappearances were met with vague explanations, legal paperwork, or complete silence, while inside the hospital staff grew increasingly uneasy as the sounds coming from the operation wing at night became harder to ignore. These were not the normal sounds of surgery, but prolonged screams, metal instruments clashing violently, and desperate cries that sometimes continued for hours, echoing to the walls long after any procedure should have ended. Several nurses resigned within months of being assigned to Dr. Crowe's wing, some suffering from anxiety and insomnia, others claiming they could still hear the screams in their dreams. While one nurse reportedly wrote in her resignation letter that St. Ravenwood was not a hospital, but a place where pain was studied, preserved, and repeated. According to internal rumors, Dr. Crowe believed that pain was essential to human evolution, that fear and suffering unlocked parts of the brain modern medicine was too afraid to explore, and during a closed medical conference, he was allegedly heard saying that true progress required abandoning moral weakness. As the years passed, his behavior became more erratic. He stopped leaving the hospital grounds, skipped meals, slept in his office, and was often seen wandering halls late at night muttering to himself, while strange symbols began appearing carved into the walls near the operating wing. Symbols no one could identify and no one admitted to drawing. Some staff claimed that lights dimmed whenever Dr. Crowe entered the operating theater. Others said the air grew heavy and cold, as if the building itself reacted to his presence, and more than one patient claimed to see a tall shadow standing beside their bed just before being wheeled into surgery. Despite mounting concerns, the hospital administration ignored every warning. Blinded by Dr. Crowe's reputation and the money flowing to St. Ravenwood, dismissing the fear as stress, imagination, or simple superstition. By the late 1960s, the hospital had already earned a quiet reputation among nearby towns as a place people avoided, especially after dark, and parents warned their children never to wander near it, saying those who entered rarely came back the same. What no one fully understood at the time was that St. Ravenwood was no longer just a medical facility, but had become something far darker, a place saturated with suffering, obsession, and unfinished work, a building that seemed to remember every scream, every incision, and every life that disappeared within its walls, patiently waiting for the moment when its darkest chapter would finally unfold and transform the hospital from a place of treatment into one of the most feared haunted locations in American history. By the early 1970s, the tension inside St. Ravenwood Hospital had reached a breaking point, as the whispers, screams, and unexplained disappearances were no longer isolated incidents, but an undeniable pattern that even the administration could no longer fully conceal. Staff turnover skyrocketed. Entire nursing teams resigned without notice, and those who stayed behind did so out of fear rather than loyalty, afraid that leaving might somehow place them next on the hospital's unseen list. Dr. Jonathan Crowe, meanwhile, seemed completely unaffected by the chaos around him, growing more withdrawn and obsessive with each passing month, spending nearly every waking hour inside the operation wing, and becoming increasingly hostile toward anyone who questioned his authority or methods. Several doctors attempted to file formal complaints, citing ethical violations and possible criminal activity, but those reports mysteriously vanished from hospital records, and the doctors involved were either transferred, silenced, or abruptly dismissed. Then, on a cold autumn night in 1974, something went terribly wrong. At approximately 2:40 a.m., a power fluctuation was reported in the East Wing, followed by alarms that failed to trigger the hospital's emergency systems, and moments later, smoke began seeping to the corridors near the operating theaters. What started as a small electrical fire rapidly transformed into an uncontrollable inferno, fueled by outdated wiring, flammable chemicals, and oxygen tanks stored too close to surgical rooms. Nurses tried desperately to evacuate patients, but many claimed the doors to the operation wing would not open, as if sealed from the inside, while others swore they heard Dr. Crowe's voice echoing through the smoke-filled halls, calm and focused, as though he were still conducting surgery. Firefighters arrived within minutes, yet even they reported something unnatural about the blaze, stating that the flames seemed to concentrate around the operating wing, refusing to spread naturally, almost as if protecting something at the center of the hospital. As the fire raged, a massive explosion rocked the building, collapsing part of the surgical floor and sending a column of smoke into the night sky that could be seen miles away. When the fire was finally extinguished hours later, St. Ravenwood Hospital was nothing more than a blackened shell, its windows shattered, walls scorched, and corridors buried under debris. Rescue teams searched tirelessly for survivors, pulling out burned equipment, collapsed gurneys, and unrecognizable remains. But one discovery shocked everyone involved. Despite extensive searches, the body of Dr. Jonathan Crowe was never found. His office was reduced to ashes, his personal records destroyed, yet the operating theater where he was last seen remained strangely intact, with the surgery table still standing and surgical tools neatly arranged, untouched by fire or smoke. Official reports concluded that Dr. Crowe must have been completely incinerated, but privately, many firefighters admitted that no trace of him existed anywhere in the ruins, not even fragments of bone. The hospital was permanently shut down following the incident, declared unsafe, and quickly abandoned, surrounded by fences and warning signs. But the town's nightmare was far from over. Within weeks of the fire, nearby residents began reporting strange phenomena. Lights flickering inside the abandoned building at night, the sound of metal clanging echoing through the woods, and the overwhelming smell of antiseptic drifting through the air despite the hospital having no power or supplies. Former staff members reported vivid nightmares in which they were back inside the operating wing, unable to move as unseen hands prepared them for surgery, and several nurses claimed they woke up with unexplained surgical markings on their skin, perfectly precise, as if performed by a professional. Over time, rumors spread that the fire had not been an accident at all, but the result of something far more deliberate, possibly an attempt to destroy evidence of illegal experiments or, according to darker theories, a ritual gone wrong. Locals began avoiding the area entirely, and even police patrols refused to respond to calls near the hospital after midnight, citing malfunctioning radios, sudden nausea, and an overwhelming sense of dread. By the 1980s, St. Ravenwood Hospital had become a full-fledged urban legend, passed down through generations as a place where something had survived the fire, something unfinished and angry, bound to the ruins by obsession and pain. Teenagers who dared each other to enter the building often ran out screaming within minutes, claiming they heard footsteps following them or felt invisible hands brushing against their backs, while some never came out at all, later found miles away in shock, unable to explain how they escaped. What terrified the locals most, however, was a pattern that began to emerge. Every strange incident, every sighting, every unexplained injury seemed to occur around the same time, 3:07 a.m., the exact hour when Dr. Crowe used to begin his most secretive procedures. It was as if the fire had not ended his work, but merely stripped away the walls that once hid it, allowing whatever it had become to continue operating freely, no longer bound by flesh, rules, or time, turning St. Ravenwood Hospital into something far worse than a haunted building, a place where the past refused to stay dead, and where the echoes of unfinished surgeries still waited patiently for their next victim. By 2010, St. Ravenwood Hospital was no longer just a local legend, but a magnet for urban explorers, paranormal investigators, and thrill seekers who believed the stories were exaggerated or fake, convinced that fear only existed because people allowed it to, and among them was a small group of 4 friends who decided to spend a single night inside the abandoned hospital to document what they believed would be nothing more than creepy visuals and old rumors. They arrived just before midnight, carrying cameras, flashlights, and audio recorders, laughing nervously as they cut through the rusted fence and stepped into the decaying corridors where paint peeled from the walls and the smell of rot mixed with something disturbingly similar to antiseptic. At first, everything seemed quiet, almost disappointingly normal, until their equipment began malfunctioning without explanation, batteries draining rapidly and static interrupting their recordings despite being fully charged. As the night deepened, they explored further into the building, eventually reaching the east wing where the operating theaters were located, and it was there that the temperature dropped sharply, their breath becoming visible as though winter had invaded the room. At exactly 3:07 a.m., every device they carried began recording at once, triggered by no human touch, and the heavy doors of the main operating room slowly creaked open, revealing a space that should have been destroyed by fire decades earlier, but instead stood eerily preserved. The surgical lights flickered on one by one, casting harsh white illumination over the operating table, and the sound of metal instruments clinking echoed through the room as if someone invisible were preparing for surgery. One of the explorers raised his camera, whispering in disbelief, when a tall figure emerged from the shadows, dressed in a scorched white lab coat stained with dark, dried blood, its posture unnaturally rigid. As it stepped closer, the group realized with mounting horror that the figure's face was wrong. Its eyes were nothing more than hollow black cavities, its skin pale and stretched tight, as if it no longer belonged to a living human being. The figure slowly turned its head toward the camera, and in a calm, emotionless voice that sounded layered with echoes, it spoke the words, "Next patient," causing the lights to explode overhead and plunging the room into darkness. Panic erupted as the group ran blindly through the corridors, their footsteps echoing behind them. Yet no matter how fast they ran, the sound of measured footsteps followed at a steady pace, never rushing, never slowing. One by one, the explorers were separated, their screams cutting abruptly into silence, until only a single survivor remained, hiding in a supply room as the sound of surgical tools scraped against metal just outside the door. When authorities later reviewed the recovered footage, the video ended with a final distorted frame showing the figure standing directly in front of the camera, its empty eye sockets filling the screen, while faint surgical instructions whisper in the background. The lone survivor was found hours later wandering along a highway miles away from the hospital barefoot, covered in shallow surgical markings that were perfectly precise, yet he never spoke a single word again. Doctors later confirmed that his vocal cords were intact, his brain uninjured, yet he remained completely mute, responding only by violently shaking whenever someone mentioned hospitals, doctors, or the time 3:07 a.m. nurses caring for him reported that he would wake up screaming every night at the same hour, clawing his chest as if something inside him was unfinished. Even more disturbing were the words repeatedly carved into his skin with unknown tools during these episodes. Words that read, "He is still operating." Following the incident, the remaining footage was classified. The hospital grounds were sealed once again, and officials publicly dismissed the event as a hoax fueled by hysteria. Yet locals knew better. Reports continued of lights turning on inside the hospital, of surgical sounds echoing through the woods, and of people going missing near the property without explanation. Paranormal investigators who attempted to enter the building after the incident claimed they felt an overwhelming presence guiding them toward the operating room, whispering instructions they could not understand. While some swore they saw a figure standing at upper floor windows, watching silently. Today, St. Ravenwood Hospital remains abandoned, decaying further with each passing year, yet the legends have not faded. Instead, they have grown stronger, fueled by new sightings, new disappearances, and the undeniable pattern that everything always happens at the same time. Locals warn that if you ever see lights inside the hospital after midnight, if you ever hear metal scraping against metal carried on the wind, you must leave immediately and never look back, because Dr. Jonathan Crowe did not die in the fire, and whatever he became is still there, still perfecting his work, still searching for patients, and still waiting for the next curious soul who believes that some places are only haunted if you let yourself be afraid.